All right, welcome back. This is going to be our first image that we will be editing, this nice looking portrait. And I know most of this course, of course, all of it is based on skin retouching, but the first step actually has nothing to do with actually going into the skin and retouching it, because our first step, like in most of the images, is going to deal with color correction, because that is very important before you actually start to edit the skin. Now, a lot of people like to color correct a photo even after editing the skin, but I just prefer to do this beforehand, because what's going to happen is that once we are ultimately working on the skin, a lot of times you will be zooming in, and what can just happen is that if you're just working with the wrong colors here, like for example in this shot, everything seems a bit too reddish and orangish, right? So that can happen because of the wrong color balance, and all these things do happen. We all know that, right? But I just prefer to do this at the start so that we get rid of these bad looking colors, and then when we're working on the skin, by zooming in, zooming out, we are dealing with the right colors. Otherwise, when you're always looking at the wrong colors, it just doesn't feel right when you're working on it. So I like to do color correction before I get started. Okay, so let's try to color correct this photo and remove this reddish orange hue that we have here. Okay, now there are a couple of ways to do this. In this case, for example, I know that, I know the color that is kind of oversaturated, like the hue, which is orange or red. So I can always go to my adjustment settings here. I can select hue saturation. So this is like the manual way of doing it, and this is not preferable. I'm just showing you. So let's say, for example, I can select something like reds and try to decrease the saturation, but then you can see it doesn't do a great job. Yeah, it gets rid of that, but then it also gets rid of some of the good tones that we want in the skin. So not too great by this method. You can go on to camera raw filter, and here also you can see one of the things we can do is that in this section which says white balance, we can try to correct this. Maybe click on auto. A lot of times this might work, a lot of times this may not work. So of course in this case it's not looking good at all. So if we go back to as shot, then we can go to the HSL adjustments, and we can play around with the saturation. Maybe probably decrease the oranges a bit. You can see this also looks better than what we started off with, but again, it's not technically too accurate. We're just guessing and going about things. So you can definitely follow these approaches also, manually do this. But a better way to do this is to actually do this the way you would do in a photography studio. Okay, and what would you do in a photography studio when you're actually clicking this shot is you would use something called as a gray card, something like this. Okay, so when you're taking your shots, you actually get this accessory called as a gray card. So how using the gray card actually works is that you just ask your subject to hold this accessory, which is called as a gray card, and you just take a shot, and then once you have one of the shots, you can see the photographer here has taken multiple shots. By the way, this is not my photo. I'm just showing you something on the internet. This is by Lastolite, by Manfrotto, so full credit to them. This does not belong to me. I should just point that out. But basically, yeah, you just take a shot with this gray card in your shot, and what this does is that once you come back, suppose you have one of these shots and you come back and open up in Photoshop, if you open up the curves adjustment here, okay, if you open up the curves adjustment here, this has, you can see these three eyedroppers here. The first one, it says sample an image to set the black point. Okay, so if I select this and click on anywhere in the image where it's too black like this, I'm giving Photoshop a reference point to what should actually be black in the shot, and it'll try to correct the colors, the other colors accordingly. So it just gets a reference point to work with. For example, I can probably select something like this, and you can see it's just changed that color cast, the bad looking color cast a bit, right? Let me just press Control and Z, or Command and Z to undo. Similarly, we have this eyedropper which tells us that I can select something white. Okay, so something like this. Maybe let's say if I select this part, it's also changed a bit. But the best dropper that actually works is this one, the one in the middle, which says sample in image to set gray point. Now what this means is we have to select something, a color which is 50% neutral gray. A 50% neutral gray color is basically half of black and white, so somewhere in between, exactly in between the exact gray, 50%, not too white, not too black, okay? So if we can find that exact color in this shot, then we can set the white balance of this shot. So for example, that's how the gray card is used. Because you have this accessory here, this has a 50% neutral gray color on it. So you can just use this, one of the shots from the shoot where you had this image, you can just use this in Photoshop. So for example, if I had the gray card here, I can just select that and I know that the rest of the image will be set accordingly. But the problem here is that we don't have a gray card. Okay, so we just have this one image. So what if there was a way to find out in this image what is actually 50% gray, or what is actually the color that we're looking for, this gray color, right? So how do we do that? And that is the technique that I want to explain to you. So right now I'm just going to close this curves adjustment layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. Okay, so I'm just going to click on this and fill this with 50% gray. So I select, I go to edit, I go to fill, I can go to contents, and you can select 50% gray. The moment I click on OK, you can see we have a new layer which is just filled with 50% gray here. Okay. Now there is, if I select this top layer, the new layer that we just made with this 50% gray color, if I change its blending mode to difference, what is happening now is that we're basically getting between these two layers, that means between this gray layer that we made and our original layer, which is the background layer right now. What is happening is we're basically making the difference of the color tones between both the images. So how can we find out, now that we know that we have there's a difference in the color tones? That's what we've done when we selected a difference blend mode. How can we find out what is neutral gray? Well, if you subtract gray from whatever is actually neutral gray in this image, the color that you'll get when you use the difference blend mode will be black in this case. So think of it like this: gray, 50% gray minus 50% gray would give you completely a black color. Where can you see the black color here? You can actually see this if I just zoom into her eye. You see this part? This is starting to go towards very black. That means what this basically is meaning right now is that in this image, this is the part which was actually 50% gray. Because when we see the difference of this with a 50% gray layer, we get black because both of them are cancelling each other out. So our job is to basically, when we go into that curves adjustment, and remember this middle eyedropper was asking us to select, you can see if I just hover on it, sample an image to set gray point, that means asking us to select something which is 50% gray. So if I were to click on this exact part somewhere here, this would give us probably the best color correction, because this is actually 50% gray. We have seen this technically, right? But still, to be more sure whether this is 50% gray or not, let's go a step further. Okay, so I'm just going to close this curves adjustment layer for now. I'm just going to zoom out again. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select an adjustment function called as threshold, which you can see here. And what this basically does is it just turns your image into this black and white monotone image, okay, and which is very helpful. So if I move this slider, okay, what you are basically seeing is the whole image has been converted into these black and white pixels. This is going to be very helpful if we start moving this towards the left side, okay, till the time we only see what is actually fully jet black in the image. Okay, so you can see here that if I do this, this part is, we already seen that this was the one where it was turning black, but now we want something which is really absolutely neutral gray. So we'll go to, you can say we can go to something like a threshold of maybe 8 or 7 is fine. And if I just zoom in, this part that we're seeing, we know that this is in the eye, right? But this is absolutely 50% gray in the eye, because you can see that we've really reduced the threshold, and here the difference in both the tones is still remaining black. The others have still disappeared. That means they were close to 50% gray. You can see earlier on that part of the eye was slightly bigger, but right now you can only see a certain amount of it the black part. That means the other was close to 50% gray, but this is even closer, almost 50% gray. Once we've located this, what we can do is we can select this eyedropper tool here, and just for reference, we can just mark this. If I press shift, okay, I'm holding down the shift key, and the moment I press the shift key, you can see it turns into this sign here, like a plus sign. So this is like the marker sign. So if I click right now, we can just mark this area, okay? Because what we're going to do is we're going to zoom out. We're going to delete both these layers. Now we don't need the threshold layer. We can just delete this. We don't need this 50% layer, okay? And what we need is, we just need the curves layer, okay? I'm going to zoom in. I know now that this part is absolutely 50% gray, okay? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to select this dropper and click right here. This will give us the most accurate result. The moment I do that, you can see it creates a beautiful change. It's absolutely magnificent. You can see if I just hide this curves layer, this was the original. Just see the reddishness. Let me just zoom in. You see this was, we had that wrong color cast, which was throwing that bad looking orange red color cast. But doing this technically using the gray point, if I just open this, boom, that's a huge difference. Just see her hair, see the skin, see the background. That's a huge difference. Let me actually zoom out. That looks better, right? So you can see that just by technically going about it in the correct way, we've been able to find a 50% gray point, or something very, very close to it, if not exactly absolutely 50% gray. And that's also good enough, right? And we have been able to get to this. Even after this, if you feel, because sometimes even this technique may not give you 100% good results, but at least now that I know that this is a good starting point, maybe if I feel that, okay, a bit of redness needs to be added, I can always go back to my hue saturation, add that bit of redness and all. But this, a lot of times, will be just perfect for you. You won't have to really do anything. If you feel like, do it after this step, okay? I know it's a bit technical to start off this course with this challenging step, but if you understood the process behind it, then you really won't have the problem. All we did was we just doing that same methodology which people use with the gray card. Only thing is we are just locating the gray point using this technique that we just did. That's all we are doing. So this is how you color correct your photo. I'm going to see you in the next part, where we will begin the process of cleaning up the skin. So we'll actually get into the skin retouching from the next part. I'll see you there. Bye for now.